Well, everyone, it's time for us to go and take a look at the iPhone 5 and see how this particular phone holds up in 2025. Now, there's a couple of things to keep in mind here for the most part. Number one, if you're going to go through and basically buy any sort of a device, definitely an iPhone like an iPhone 5 would make a lot of sense to go and buy on one hand. On the other hand, it may not make the most amount of sense to go and buy, for the most part. So, we'll go and take a look at it throughout this whole entire video. First things first though, if you do want to go ahead and pick up any phones, that you want to go and pick up in the used market, links will be down in the description below. You can get that from there and you can help support the channel at the exact same time. Now, starting off with the outside of both this particular iPhone. The iPhone 5 came out back in 2012, so it is a little bit of an older type of device as you can imagine. It's not the latest and greatest anymore. It's definitely going to be a little bit of a more outdated type of phone, which I think is totally okay. It's probably what you'd expect as of this point, but it still is like a pretty good looking phone and it's a pretty good feeling phone when it comes down to it too. So on the exterior, on the front side, you're getting a 4-inch IPS panel on it. So it's an IPS LCD display. There's not really anything super crazy going on here. It's a pretty basic type of panel for the most part. So I think that right there is kind of one of those big things to keep in mind, because if you're planning on going through and getting a type of device, you probably would want a phone that maybe looks a little bit more modern. And this type of phone, for the most part, just doesn't really look like that great of a device anymore. Of course, it still looks beautiful and it still feels good, but there's a lot of things missing out on this display that we're getting on basically every phone nowadays. Like, it doesn't have an OLED display, no 120 Hz, no high brightness, big bezels on the top and the bottom. Like, you still have the home button on this phone. There's still a lot of things inside of this phone that you might not be the biggest fan of. So just kind of keep that in mind for the most part. Again, it's not the biggest deal, but it is one of those things you might end up noticing here. Now, on top of that, when you look at this type of device on the bottom, this was actually the first iPhone to bring a Lightning port. So that right there was actually pretty insane. Again, if you were to go through and pick up a device, it is actually a pretty nice thing to basically have a device that is kind of situated like this to be able to go through and get that type of experience. Again, not the best device in the world, but it is actually pretty nice to go through and get it, still having a Lightning is still fairly common. It still is actually like a nice kind of port to have. You're getting flat sides all throughout this phone. Now, this is one area of this phone that actually does feel pretty good. Like, you're able to go through and still have a flat-sided phone, which is fairly modern nowadays because a lot of phones still have the flat sides. So I feel like that's a pretty cool thing. On the back side, you're getting this aluminum back. You're getting a glass little part at the top and the bottom here, which again, that in and of itself is another really cool thing. So kind of going through and getting that type of capability, I think is actually pretty nice. So that gives me a little bit more comfort of basically owning a device like this, which is pretty nice. And you're getting a single camera setup on the back side. There's not really too many other things kind of going on here for the most part, as I can kind of imagine, but I would probably say that going through and getting a phone, getting a device in general, these are pretty solid devices. Again, if there's better options out there, then go for them, but this one just, it's not terrible, but it's definitely not that great either, so just kind of keep that in mind when it comes down to it. Now, on top of that, another very important thing to keep in mind here too is the fact that with these types of devices like the iPhone 5, this phone doesn't cost what it used to cost. I think it was probably around $600 or $700 when it first came out. This device does not cost this much money anymore. It costs substantially less, which is actually a really nice thing to kind of think about. If you're going to go through and pick up a phone like this, you're going to be getting a device that is substantially cheaper than you probably would think. So it's a very cheap phone, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's a phone worth buying. In terms of the camera, this phone is basically giving you an 8 megapixel standard camera on the back, and it's giving you a 1.2 megapixel camera on the front. Now, this is a pretty basic type of layout when it kind of comes down to it. This is a very, very basic type of phone. There's not really anything crazy going on here for the most part. Like I said before, it's more or less what you'd expect. And as I've always stated, if you're going to go through and pick up some sort of a device, you're going to be getting a pretty basic type of layout and a pretty basic type of panel. So I think that's kind of what you'd expect. I think, if you're going to be here and if you're going to get a device, these types of phones aren't really going to be giving you that great of an experience. You're getting 1080p at 30 frames per second, and then you're getting 720p at 30 frames per second on the front side. So that right there, I think as well, it works, it gets the job done, but once again, it's not really going to be giving you that great of an experience here. There are way better devices out there that can give you way better experiences, And this thing just isn't really going to be giving you that here. So I feel like that in and of itself is another kind of problem that you might experience here as well, because you might want to go through and like actually pick up a device that is going to be giving you a much better experience. And unfortunately, this device from a camera side is not really going to be giving you that. So kind of keep that in mind there. Another very large issue that you might be running into inside of the iPhone 5, in fact, probably the biggest issue that I personally run into, is the fact that with these types of phones, you're basically going to be going through and getting a device that is basically done getting software updates. So this right there is a very big issue. Like if you're going to go through and pick up a device, you probably do not want to go and buy a phone that's going to be outdated with software by the time you buy it, right? That is exactly the biggest problem, the biggest issue that you might run into. And I feel like that would be the biggest problem that I would personally run into as well. Like if I'm going to go through and pick up a device, it really doesn't make a lot of sense to buy a phone that's already outdated with software. And that's kind of what's going on here for the most part. So I do think that in and of itself is another issue you might be running into. And even when it comes down to the battery life, this thing is going to be giving you a 1440 milliamp hour battery. That is kind of a smaller size battery to have inside of a device once again. So if you're going to go through and like pick up a device, that right there is another kind of big issue that you might be running into here as well. Because like I said before, you might be wanting a device that might be giving you a little bit of a better experience, especially from the battery standpoint. And that's not quite what's going to end up happening here for the most part. Now, on top of that, another very important thing to keep in mind here too, is that with something like the iPhone 5, the performance of this phone, it's not going to be too terrible. Like it's going to be a bad performing phone for sure, but it may not actually be as bad as you probably think. Like this type of device for the most part is still going to be giving you like an okay experience when it comes down to kind of some areas of this type of device. Like if you want to, you could go through and like get a phone that's going to be giving you like, 1 gigabyte of RAM in 2025. Like, you can do it if you want to, but it's highly recommended to not do anything like that whatsoever. Getting devices like this at this type of rate, it just doesn't make a lot of sense. There are way better options out there, and it makes a lot more sense to go and buy some other devices that might be giving you an overall better experience. So I think that right there is one of those big things and big key areas to kind of keep in mind there as well. Because like I said, if you're going to go through and get a better performing device, this thing is just going to be a little limited when it comes down to it. Because there are way better options out there and way better devices to go and buy. So when it comes down to it, I do think a device like an iPhone 5 is, good, gets the job done, but there are way better devices out there. This thing is not worth buying in any capacity. There are a lot more options to go and buy. And if you're going to go through and pick up a device, like I said before, it definitely makes a lot more sense to go and buy a device that will be giving you a little bit of a better experience. And unfortunately, with something like this one, it's not really going to be giving you that good of an experience anymore. I think there's better options. If you look at something like an iPhone, iPhone 10R or 10S, that's the bare minimum I would recommend. Then you have devices like an iPhone 14 Pro, which is probably a really good, well-rounded device. And then you can go for an iPhone 13 Pro as well. Those are really solid. But an iPhone, 5, it's completely not worth buying. And I wouldn't even think about buying this device anymore. So in terms of that kind of covers it up there. If you have any other thoughts or questions, please let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that will mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.